All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1,000,000 Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with my friend Rob McCleland. Rob, welcome. So awesome to have you here.
Hey, Kevin, you know what? I remember the day we met, and
Yep.
it's just been this mutual admiration society ever since. So,
That's
so
right.
much love for you, and I'm looking forward to being with you today.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, I'm going to give a shout out to Steve here because you and I met at one of Steve Sims's speakeasy events almost 2 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And I can still remember the conversation that you and I had. It was on break in the afternoon, the second day. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was like a 15-minute break or so. And you and I were talking, and we get done with break, and they're trying to herd us back to our seats to get started. And you're like, oh my gosh, Kev, man, I talked to you the whole time and I didn't let you talk at all. But I want to get to know you better. And I'm like, no big deal. We'll have a conversation later or whatever. And we did. And we just right from the get-go, Rob, we just totally hit it off. And
Yeah, so true. I think it's both of our spirits have this desire to give and add value. And when you meet like kindred spirit people, like-minded spirit on that, you just can't meet enough of them. It just brings such joy to your life.
that's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is just kind of start by turning it over to you. You just, I'm always fascinated. In fact, we starting to do this interview today. You and I've been on the line talking for like almost an hour now, and we're like, maybe we should do the interview. But I'm always so fascinated to hear about the impact you're making in this world, and so I want to just have you share a little bit about what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you get to do, and just set a little bit of context to start with.
I will. I'm a lover of all things leadership. I went all the way through. I have a PhD in organizational leadership. I used to be dean of a university, and it was all about leadership and trying to build the best university campus we could for students. Because of that, I've studied all the great leaders, done some work for someone most of your listeners will be familiar with, a guy named John Maxwell. As a result of that, a couple of years later, John actually recruited me to come and lead the largest leadership development group in the world, his Equip group. And at that time, they had been into 171 countries. And I said, John, do you know how many there are in the world? And I said, there's not 196. And I said, at one time, you had a goal to get into all of them, because I heard you say that 10 years ago. You won't remember it, but I remember it, because I've been trying to help your group since then. And I said, but don't hire me unless you are still committed to getting into every country of the world, inside the borders, to teach leadership development. He said, Rob, I'm not sure if that can be done. He's thinking Somalia, Djibouti, North Korea. How's that going to happen? And I looked at him in the interview. This was sitting at a table at Pebble Beach. And I looked at him and I said, John, if you hire me, we'll either get in every country of the world, or when they find my body, it would be pointed in that direction. And he started laughing. And he looked over at Mark Cole, his CEO. And Mark's like, I don't know. He looked over at Tom, his best friend. Tom's like, I told you. And he looked back at me and said, okay, you're hired. And you get it done in 3 years. And I'm like, 3 years? It's taken you 17. You've got the easy ones. 3 years is done. Well, that was all inside my head. What came out of my mouth is, yes, sir, let's go. And we got it done in 18 months because I had been thinking and dreaming 4 or 5 years, not working for their organization, but that was such a great goal. How could I help them? How could I help them? And I helped them get into 5 or 6 countries by that time. So that kind of really opened up my world even more. And I had run some pretty large and effective companies, but I found the thing I love doing more than anything else is getting involved in the lives of younger entrepreneurs. Specifically in my mind, people who never had a dad or someone to help them, because that was my story. And so I kind of have this theory of 3 hugs and a kick in the rear. And so now I've sold 2 3/4 businesses. And I'm in, when I help these entrepreneurs, I get take a little revenue position or a equity position in their businesses and try to help them any way I can. And I am the happiest guy in the world. That's because I have a day job that can pay all the bills, and I help business owners who are looking to maximize their growth or to sell their business and get the most money. I work with a company at generational.com. We've helped sell more small businesses than anyone else 16 years in a row, and they do it with integrity. And so I'm very, very proud to represent them. You add all of that up and throw in the world's greatest wife of 37 years, and I'm a happy guy.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, for sure. For sure. You have, and I remember shortly after meeting you for the first time, you shared the whole story of working with John and got to go in more in depth of getting into some of the, and it was downright scary getting into some of those countries, you know.
Yeah, we had people who would actually risk their lives for us. They trusted us that much. But that's how serious we took it as well, that we were willing to put our lives on the line and to do this. And I think with John, that's the only reason they had kind of slowed down. It's like, it's getting pretty scary at this point. But again, the way I had been thinking and strategizing, I think I've mitigated the risk as much as possible. I would take a shot at this. I would do it if somebody asked me to. And so when I was at that point, can you imagine? 2 or 3 weeks later, I get a call from the guy saying, "Can I interview you for this position?" And all of a sudden, as a person of faith, I'm going, "Okay, God, what you got here?"
Yeah.
And it ended up being, a match made in heaven for what he needed to do at that time in his life with his company.
Yeah. Yeah. I really, like I said, I've always been fascinated whenever whenever I'm in your presence and having you share your stories and experiences. It's just so amazing. And being a faith-based guy myself too, and just being, so many times us guys, especially, women, they have this thing called intuition. And
right.
I believe guys have it too. We're just like so busy, more like a bull in a china shop, that we just can't hear it.
That's true. And usually our intuition is going to take a whole lot of courage. And then you're thinking, is this God? Is this me? Where does that all go?
Yeah.
But once you can hear his voice and use your wisdom, man, life is pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. So now that we've got a little bit of context, and I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. Have you ever been introduced to a person that persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Rob, I am just really excited to hear your story, your experience around this, and just give you the opportunity to honor somebody or somebody's who have had such a profound impact on your life.
Yeah, it is a great honor for me to do so. I'm going to try to get through it without crying because people who know my story, it is really quite remarkable. My mom was married and divorced 4 times by the time I was in 4th grade. And she would come home from a different bar every night at 2 a.m. with a different guy. And so unfortunately, she was an alcoholic. We lived in a very poor part of the town in poverty housing. And we were a welfare family. Back then, they didn't even have food stamps. They had food commodities. You'd go and wait in line, once a month and get the free handout foods from the government. And so it was me and 2 sisters and then my mom, but my mom was really an absentee. And so my sisters and I, even at a young age, as grammar school kids, we were kind of huddling together and fending for our own, because when some of these clowns showed up, it wasn't a good day, right? So in that, I probably grew up faster than I needed to in some ways. But I know there were some real deficits in my life, because I'd see these other families and you go over to their house and they would have like meals and they'd have like milk in the refrigerator and all these things. I'm like, wow, they must be rich. They have milk and bread, that type of thing. And I tell you what, one of God's gifts to me very early on was my coaches. I happened to be a decent athlete. I played 4 sports in high school, but I had these great male influence in my life who would kick my rear for me. And knock it off. There's no future in that, and I think most of them probably knew somewhat of my story or the background, because it wasn't a very big city. And as a result, probably took me under their arm a little bit, and so made it through. Ends up, I didn't know I was smart, but ends up I was pretty good on the educational side. A high school counselor, I get called into her office, and this is when I'm a senior in high school, and there's two guys there with suits on. And I'm like, I don't know who these guys are, but whatever it is, I didn't do it, that type of thing. And she goes, no, Rob, these guys are from the state of California, and just tell them about your story at home. And I'm like, no, everything's fine. She's like, Rob, no, there's nothing that's going to happen. But the state has some programs to help people like you. And so just tell them what's going on. So I just kind of basically told a real basic version of my story. And they're like, okay, he can go now. I go back in the next day and I find out that I had been made a ward of the state of California, and that they would now pay for my college education if I went to a state university.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, no one in my family had ever been to college. Kevin, I can tell you assuredly, I had no idea the difference between a associate's or a bachelor's or a master's or anything else. No, I didn't know any of that language. Go back in, and here's this old lady. That was the year she was retiring. That's how old this guidance counselor was. Why did she do all this for me? That it's just when people are generous and watching out for you, it gives you such a desire to spend the rest of your life doing that for others. I go back in and she goes, here, sign this. What is it? It is a college application for you to go to University of California at Sacramento, because we're getting you out of here. And Sacramento is about 3 hours away. And she said, you got to get out of here. And so you need to find a job and go to school there, and you're going to have a shot in life. And so I did that, and moved to Sacramento, started studying. And for the first time, I really didn't know I was smart, because all I wanted to do is either cheat or barely pass and play sports and chase girls. That was my goal in life. And now for the first time, realize you can't cheat, you get thrown out of school. That's really bad, And so as I'm studying, I'm going, oh my goodness, this is so easy. Why didn't I just study all the time? And so I started doing that. It was at that time I heard somebody like me could be forgiven, changed my life. Met the woman of my dreams. We've now been married 37 years. And we started our little life together. Yet I still had many deficits in my life, and I didn't realize it at the time. But growing up in that toxic situation and all the trauma at home, by the time I had become a senior in high school, both of my sisters had run away. And so it was only me at home. And it was not a pretty sight, because my mom didn't want me at home. And so, it was rough. It's really funny. I took all these psychological exams later in life, and they said, okay, something's wrong here, because you say, yeah, I had a good childhood. It was fun. I played sports. I did. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, it sounds like a terrible childhood. I'm like, well, yeah, but it was fine. And they're like, no, it wasn't fine. And so you have no idea some of the psychological deficits or how you look at the world. And so I had a lot of work to do through counseling and other things to begin to rebuild that. But I still never had anyone in my life who would say, hey, knock that off. There's no future in that, and would kick my rear like a parent would, until I met a very successful businessman named Fred Broling. And when I met Fred Broling, I was, at that time, I had been a youth pastor, and then I had become an executive pastor in a little larger church, but I really had this business mindset. And so ends up, he was a businessman in the church. And when I was speaking at something, he heard me give a sports illustration. He said, hey, I heard you give a sports illustration. Do you like sports? I said, yeah, I do. He goes, well, my wife and I are going to go to a tennis match. Wondering if you'd like to go with us. And can you imagine this? You're kind of going, what would you do? You go like, a tennis match? Yeah, whatever. I asked my wife, she's like, whatever. Yeah, a tennis match. Okay, well, great. Just meet us here. And we met for a meal. Then we drove and went to this tennis match. It was box seats, US Open men's finals in Flushing Meadows, New York. And I'm going, oh, a tennis match, as you're seeing Jim Nance and the announcer sitting further from the court than you are. And there's this little sign and it says Colorite Plastics. And I said, do you know Mr. Colorite? And he goes, I am Mr. Colorite. And I said, well, tell me about your businesses. And so he started talking and we're talking. I said, I want to come see him. He's like, come on. So I went out there and I'm like, well, why do you do this? What about this? And he goes, you ask a lot of questions for, and I'm like, well, I'm just curious, but it seems like if you really wanted to make more money, you should. And can you imagine you got some guy who's a pastor now with this guy who's had all these businesses successful, but I always had this mind of strategy and what about, and could you? And so for some reason, he and he liked to golf. I like to golf. And we just started becoming friends. He started saying, hey, Rob, don't do that. When you do that, there's no future in it. You really ought to consider. And he was acting sort of like a mentor. Well, I prayed. I was scared to death. And I approached him one day and I said, hey, Fred, I've never had a dad. And I said, you don't need any more sons. I'm not asking you to be my dad. But if I did have a dad, there would be times, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, where I'd call him and I'd just say, can you help me think through this? Or can I get some perspective or something? And I was wondering if you would pray about it during those times. Would it be okay if I called you? And he said, no. And I said, oh, okay. He goes, no, I'm not going to pray about it. I already know the answer is yes. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, of course God would want me to do something like that. I'm like, oh, okay. Kevin, from that exact day, he started acting like my dad. Well, what do you mean, Rob? Well, they were very, very successful and they were incredibly, incredibly generous. So anything that I have that's this generous heart, it all comes from Fred showing me how to be generous with people, generous with employees, generous with your business. Here's what I mean. They had quite a beautiful estate in Summit, New Jersey, just outside New York City. And they loved their painters of their, place, and they had them do lots of work. Then they bought a ranch in Montana, and they loved their painters so much, they flew their painters out to Montana to paint their ranch. Okay. Now watch this. 6 months later, Don and I have saved up all of our money, everything. We're getting like our first little house. And this house is it's an expensive place and it's a terrible house on a little tiny lot. And anyone would buy the house just for the lot, scrape it and put a real house on there. We bought the house. We didn't have any money to scrape it. That was going to be our house. And so it's this horrible little house in this nice neighborhood. And I called Fred and I said, okay, we got the house. Now what? He's like, well, you're going to have to paint. I said, okay. So I said, I know how to do that. We'll scrape everything, get it all done. He's like, well, when do you want to do that? And I said, well, how about then? He goes, well, hold on, let me check. They flew out from New Jersey. They put their jeans and T-shirts on and spent 3 days in the hot sun helping us paint our house, even though they had flown their painters out to paint their ranch. Why? Because that's what parents would do.
Yeah.
And he just started acting like a dad, and he's never stopped. And in business, thankfully, I have made a ton of money in business comparative to, most in my family or certainly anyone in my family and other things. But when I see how blessed I have been in business and these companies I run and other things, 0% chance I could have done that without Fred Brolin.
Yeah.
And he was just looking around kind of saying, who can I pour my life into? Who needs help? Fred has never been easy on me. So many times I go to him and say, hey, I got this great idea. What about this? And he goes, no, that's not going to work. What about this? And I go, no, it will. He's like, no, Rob, here's what's going to happen. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. He's like, well, try it, but I'm just telling you. And it would always turn out exactly what he said. And I'm like, I hate this guy, right? And so now all of a sudden, I'm a little bit older in my life now than he was when I met him. And I have these younger entrepreneurs saying, here's what I'm going to do. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. How do you know? Trust me, I got that Fred thing going on.
Hey, that's right. That's right.
Okay, so Fred and Janet are now in their 80s. They've been married over 60 years. They are the most active, fun couple you've ever met. You can't keep up with them. You can try. Good luck on that, that type thing. He told me a story. He goes, hey, did you know when you turn 80, they want you to go down and take your driver's test again? He goes, what kind of garbage is that? And he goes, so I go, what'd you do? He goes, well, he drives down in his like top down Mercedes, tells the guy, come on, I don't have all day, jump in, and does the driver's test. He goes, everything was great, except when I got back, right when they were taking the picture, some old dude jumped in front of the camera. He goes, apart from that, it was fine, that type. So can you imagine a guy with that mentality who has blessed thousands of people around the world? They had a little home in Florida, and I asked them once, and they thought back, and they came up with 8 different couples, mostly missionaries, who they had given their house to in Florida for a week. Beautiful house with a pool and everything, to have that as their honeymoon because they couldn't afford to go anywhere. It's just that type of thing. Yeah. Anything that they have, they're going to figure out how to bless other people with it. Can you imagine if you even just got to meet someone like that? Well, I've had him as my dad for over 30 years. Yeah. And I just could not be more thankful. I would be nowhere without him. Yeah. And I made a little tape for him once for Christmas. And I said, here's my Christmas gift, Fred. I spend my life going around looking for little guys who need some help now. And to think I've been able to find 20 or 30 or 50 of those and invest in them and kick their rear for them. And, we have all of our kids are adopted now, and we've done nothing but found people and give them 3 hugs and a kick in the rear and love them unconditionally and see what God has for them. So Fred Broling is the most special person I've ever met in my life.
Wow. Wow. And you can just sense that every bit of that as you just shared all that. You can just tell, wow, here's so, and I'll tell you, listening to you share, my dad passed away when I was just 16 years old. And he got diagnosed with cancer at the beginning of my 10th grade or 9th grade year and died at the end of my 10th grade year. And I will tell you, it was really hard for a young kid of 15 and 16 years old to watch your dad get sick and deteriorate that way. Mm-hmm. But also, I am so thankful for that 18-month period, because my dad and I had conversations, so many conversations during that 18-month period. And as you're sharing what you just shared, I couldn't help but think of that time period and how much my dad poured into me for 18 months,
Mm-hmm.
And
wow.
And I know if he could see me now, he'd be extremely proud right now.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Fred is pretty damn proud of you too.
Well, I'm so proud to have been a surrogate son and someone who has actually learned to be smart enough to listen to his wisdom. But yeah. Kevin, I want to tell you how proud of you I am, and seeing what you do with your clients and help them establish these friendships where all you want is to bring people together who are going to bless each other. And I'm thinking, who does that? And now to hear a part of your story, would your dad be, oh my goodness, he would be so proud. But there are a lot of people out there who are proud of you and proud to know someone like you, and count me amongst the top of the list there.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, for anybody listening to this now, just kind of, who just heard what you shared, Rob, and is like, man, Kev, I really like Rob. I like who Rob is. I like how he shows up. If anybody wanted, just felt compelled to reach out to you, or what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, probably just go to rob@leadertribe.com, leadertribe.com. That was one of the things Kevin and I had in common when we met. You had Tribe for Leaders. I had Leader Tribe. We're like, I like this guy. So rob@leadertribe.com. Do me a favor, don't look at the website, because I spent a couple hours with the guy today. I've done nothing with it in a couple of years. We're redoing it, rebranding it. So in about 6 months, I'll be able to look at the website too. But I still get those email addresses. Or if you know Kevin well, feel free to reach out to him. And Kevin, Absolutely. If you know them and trust them, then please give them my cell phone number as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm just going to do another plug really quick, because It was right about, in fact, where you and I met at Steve's event. The day after that event, that was in San Diego 2 years ago. I stopped on my way out of town the next day to meet a friend of mine for lunch. And through that conversation, hosting a podcast was not even on my radar at all. But yet this friend of mine, Brad Costanzo, we had lunch that day, and through that, I just felt led at his urging to do a podcast. He's like, Kevin, he's like, my gosh, for a guy like you who values relationships so much, this is what I think is going to be perfect for you. And it has been. And I still remember posting about it on Facebook. I had started doing some interviews just to like test the waters and stuff. And it was such an amazing experience. I was posting about it on Facebook, and I said, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to start a doggone podcast. And you had saw that, and all you did was sent me a note and said, hey, if I can help out, here's a link for you. And you guys have been such a blessing, because Rob, for those of you listening, Rob owns one of the companies he owns is a company called Streamlined Podcasts, and they have been helping me with my podcast so that I can just focus on what I love doing, which is having these conversations, and I don't have to worry about none of the tech stuff, none at all. So,
yeah, no, it's an amazing team. They do a great job, not only taking out every all the background noise, and then doing all your social media for you. Yes. And I'm blessed to know that team. We started off very small, but we've hired such great people. They said, hey, we could do this, we could do this. And so to get to that place where I can tell my most treasured friends, no, we can do a great job for you. That feels good to me.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Rob, any last thing you want to say before we call it a wrap?
No, very thankful. I just want to encourage you and your listeners. Think about this. There are 10,000 more Robs out there. Who was a good dude, cocky, full of himself. But the reason I was cocky and full of myself is because most people who come out of my situation go to this place of entitlement and life isn't fair and the world owes me something. The others, and it's a very small percentage, but they go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and they get real cocky, like, hey, I might have had a bad background, but I'll kick your butt, and they just get this kind of little cocky thing. And all that is compensating for your insecurities. And so now when I see somebody who's kind of like that, I'm like, okay, there's probably something going on there. And like, hey, tell me about yourself. Where'd you grow up? What about? And all of a sudden to see them decompress and like, oh, wow, I don't have to show off for this person and talk to them, find out they have real needs and then enter into their lives. There is no more joy I have in my life than meeting great people. And half of the great people I've met in life, I met them originally when they were just a little Rob or a little Don running around who just needed someone to love them, just needed some unconditional love.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage others, keep your eyes open. God will bring those opportunities your way.
That's right. That's right. And as we wrap up, I had to comment that photo of you and your wife behind you there. I love that photo. I remember seeing that you put on Facebook about that, and I think that's just awesome.
Yeah. So I had it made into a painting for her for Christmas.
Yeah.
Just it just so happened the photographer caught it perfect where she looks like, yes, you may kiss the queen, and she is, and I love it. So that's good.
Yeah. Well, Rob, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to share this with other people because I know it's going to make such an impact on them. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks, Kevin. Great to be with you.
Yeah.